Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at, well, a pretty big shakeup, actually. It's happening in the world of mobile chip manufacturing, the stuff that powers the phone right there in your pocket. We're talking about Google and a really crucial decision they've made about their Tensor G5 chip production.
Yeah, it's a significant move. And this deep dive is all about getting into why they did it. We're pulling from a WCCIF tech report, which itself is citing details from the Bell, so some interesting layers there.
Right. And our goal for you listening is to unpack that why. What does this shift tell us about the competition? We're talking Samsung versus TSMC, the giants, and ultimately, what could it mean for your phone down the line? We'll try to pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising bits too. So let's get into it.
Okay, so the core news, as you said, it's Google moving the Tensor G5 production for the Pixel 10 series. And the big deal here is that it's going to TSMC.
Right. TSMC, not Samsung this time.
Exactly. It's the first time TSMC will be mass producing these specific Google chips.
Okay, so it's more than just changing suppliers then. The report gets pretty technical. It mentions Google using TSMC's, what was it, second gen 3-meter N3E node, and something called InfoPOP packaging. What does that signal? Is that just standard stuff or?
No, that's pretty top tier. It signals Google is really aiming for the cutting edge, but maybe also reliability. The N3E node, that's TSMC's refined 3-nanometer process, super tiny, efficient transistors. Think more power, less battery drain, hopefully.
Okay.
And the InfoPOP, that's advanced packaging, stacking chip parts together tightly. It all points toward TSMC's reputation for, actually delivering these advanced things reliably.
High yield rates, that sort of thing.
Precisely. Fewer duds off the production line.
Yeah.
Which is huge when you're making millions of phones.
Right, which brings us to Samsung. How are they taking this? The report said they're intensively analyzing the situation, even held a big strategy meeting. So what was the actual problem? Why did Google walk?
Well, it probably wasn't a total shock internally. Samsung's chip division, their foundry, has been facing some headwinds. The report uses phrases like incessant setbacks, complex problems.
Oof.
Yeah. And the big one, the really critical failure, seems to be getting their own 3-nanometer GAA node yields up.
GAA, that's gate all around, the next big transistor thing.
Exactly. It's supposed to be better, but if you can't make enough working chips reliably, well, that's a deal breaker for a huge customer like Google.
Okay, so 3-nanometer was a bust, yield-wise, but I thought Samsung was talking up their 2-nanometer stuff. Are they making progress there? What's the recovery plan look like?
We are making some progress, yeah. The report mentions decent progress with 2-nanometer GAA. Apparently, a prototype chip, the Exynos 2600, using that process, actually started trial production recently.
Oh, yeah.
Their big focus now is just yield, 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 get it to 50% first, then try and climb higher.
But the report mentioned skepticism, right, from the industry.
Yeah, definitely skepticism. Companies like Google, Qualcomm, too, they're going to want to see proof. They'll rigorously test anything Samsung produces before they commit again, especially after the 3-nanometer issues. The feeling is Samsung still has internal hurdles clear in that foundry business.
Makes sense. So with Samsung struggling, TSMC seems like the obvious choice. But why TSMC specifically? Was it just about fixing the immediate yield problem?
Well, reliability was key, sure. Google definitely chose the safer path, as the source puts it. TSMC's track record there is just solid. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just a short-term fix.
Oh.
Google executives apparently went to Taiwan. And they didn't just place an order for the G5. They reportedly secured an exclusive deal with TSMC.
Exclusive? For how long?
To make Tensor chips all the way up to Pixel 14.
Pixel 14, that's got to be, what, 5 years out?
Yep. Basically a 5-year commitment.
Wow. Okay, 5 years. That's practically an eternity in the mobile world, isn't it?
It really is.
What does that signal? Just absolute faith in TSMC. Is Google basically locking its entire phone future to TSMC's tech roadmap now?
It certainly looks that way. I mean, it suggests Google isn't just thinking about fixing today's problem. They're betting on TSMC's future tech, too. They're likely securing access, maybe even priority access to whatever TSMC develops next, 2-nanometer, maybe even beyond.
So they want that performance edge for Pixel long term.
Exactly. Keep Pixel competitive. But yeah, it does mean hitching their wagon pretty firmly to one supplier. That always carries some risk.
Yeah.
Less bargaining power, potential supply chain issues if TSMC hits a snag. But clearly Google thinks the benefits outweigh those risks right now.
And TSMC must love that kind of long-term commitment. What does this do for their market position overall? The report touched on that too, right?
Oh, absolutely. It solidifies their dominance. The estimate mentioned is TSMC hitting maybe 75% of the foundry market share by 2026.
75%, that's huge.
It's massive. And it's not just Google. The report mentions TSMC's phenomenal 2-millimeter yields are expected to leave Samsung and Intel foundry, pretty far behind.
Right.
And think about who else uses TSMC. Apple, NVIDIA, AMD. They're all expected to be lining up for TSMC's 2-millimeter tech too.
So does that much concentration worry anyone? Or does it just push innovation harder?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, TSMC is clearly executing incredibly well. On the other, when so many key players rely on one manufacturer for the absolute bleeding edge, yeah, it gives TSMC immense influence, pricing power, control over the tech cadence. It's a fascinating dynamic to watch.
Okay, so Google's making this massive long-term shift to TSMC for the core processor. But
Yeah.
is it a complete breakup with Samsung? The report mentioned something else, didn't it?
Yeah, the nuance. It's not a total split, which is interesting. The Pixel 10, despite having a TSMC-made Tensor chip, is apparently still going to use Samsung's Exynos 5G modems.
Oh, so they didn't switch the modem part to someone else, like MediaTek?
Nope. Seems they're sticking with Samsung for the modem. It shows the supply chain is, well, complicated. Google still sees value in some Samsung components. It keeps a relationship alive, even if it's just, a specific piece of hardware. Leaves a tiny crack in the door, maybe.
A tiny crack. But given that 5-year exclusive deal for the main chip, how realistic is it for Samsung to actually win Google back for future tensors? Seems like a long shot.
It does seem like a long shot for sure. The report sort of acknowledges that. It says something like, in the distant future, Samsung could potentially win Google back if their newer tech, like that 2-millimeter process, really proves itself.
If they fix those yield problems and overcome the skepticism.
Exactly. If they can demonstrate rock-solid reliability and performance with their next-gen stuff. But the report ends that thought with, only time will tell.
Right. Lots of ifs.
A whole lot of ifs. Samsung has a mountain to climb to rebuild that trust, especially with Google now locked in with TSMC for so long.
Okay, so let's quickly recap for everyone listening. The big takeaway here is Google's major pivot, moving its core Tensor chip production from Samsung to TSMC, starting with Pixel 10. This seems driven by Samsung's struggles with getting their 3-nanometer tech working reliably at scale.
Right. And it's a huge vote of confidence in TSMC, cemented by that really long-term 5-year exclusive deal. A big blow for Samsung's chip-making ambitions. But they're still in the game with modems and pushing forward with 2-nanometer tech.
Which leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it?
Definitely.
What does this consolidation around TSMC mean for innovation overall? Samsung is pushing hard on 2-nanometer GAA, but can they realistically disrupt this dynamic anytime soon, especially with Google locked in elsewhere for half a decade?
Yeah, and what does that mean for competition, for pricing, and ultimately for the performance and features you get in the phones you actually use every day? Has the landscape been set for the next 5 years, or could Samsung still pull off a comeback?
Something to definitely keep an eye on.